Maybe you could tell us who first suggested the idea of reproduction without sex.
Your wife?
Get out, Mikey.
Did you know Matthew Broderick's meteoric rise after Ferris Bueller was followed by a life-changing moment overseas, one that still lingers quietly in the background of his career? It's a lesser-known chapter in a career that's had some incredible highs and some painful turns. But Broderick's story didn't begin or end there. For a moment in the 80s, he was everywhere. The smart, slightly awkward outsider with a gift for understatement, he was the face of teenage rebellion in Ferris Bueller, the unlikely Cold War hacker in WarGames, and eventually the voice of one of Disney's most iconic characters. So, what happened to Matthew Broderick? Let's fade to black. Matthew Broderick was born on March 21st, 1962 in Manhattan, New York City, practically in the shadow of Broadway. His father, James Broderick, was a well-respected character actor, best known for his role on the long-running medical drama Family. His mother, Patricia, was a playwright and painter. So from the beginning, Matthew was surrounded by the rhythms of performance. Not in a glitzy Hollywood sense, but in a lived-in working artist kind of way. Despite the creative household, acting wasn't his first path. He attended the prestigious Walden School on Manhattan's Upper West Side, where he was more interested in sports and music. But after a knee injury sidelined his athletic ambitions, he began taking drama classes, and something clicked. According to Broderick himself, his first major breakthrough was a high school scene study opposite his future acting coach, Uta Hagen. That performance impressed her enough that she took him under her wing. From there, things moved fast. He landed his first professional role in a workshop production of playwright Horton Foote's Valentine's Day, and not long after, he was cast in the Broadway production of Torch Song Trilogy. By 1983, he was already turning heads in Neil Simon's Brighton Beach memoirs, playing Eugene Morris Jerome, a neurotic, wisecracking teen, loosely based on Simon himself. That role would become a recurring one throughout Broderick's early career, and it laid the groundwork for the screen persona he'd soon be known for. Vulnerable, clever, and just slightly offbeat. That same year, he made his film debut in Max Duggan Returns, opposite Jason Robards and Marsha Mason. It was a small film, but Broderick was sharing scenes with some serious screen veterans. He had an ease about him on camera, like he wasn't acting so much as just being, and that kind of presence is rare, especially for someone barely out of their teens. But it was his very next film that would change everything, the film I first discovered him in, a techno-thriller about a teenager who almost starts World War III from his bedroom. If Max Duggan Returns was a solid warm-up, WarGames was the ignition switch. A bored but brilliant teenager who accidentally hacks into a top-secret military computer system and nearly triggers a nuclear war. On paper it sounds like something out of a pulpy paperback, but WarGames struck a nerve. It was sleek, sharp, and genuinely thrilling.
Shall we play a game?
Tapping straight into Cold War paranoia and the emerging fascination with home computers. For me personally, this one was a big deal. I still watch it at least a couple of times a year, and I'm not even sure I could tell you how many times I've seen it in total. It came out just as the home computer boom was gaining traction in the early 80s, and for a lot of us, it felt like the future. That green terminal screen, the eerie synthesized score, the looming dread of global thermonuclear war, all from a suburban kid's bedroom. It was exhilarating and oddly believable. Broderick was perfect for the role. He wasn't some cool hacker stereotype, he was soft-spoken, curious, a little awkward, but very smart. And more importantly, he was relatable. You could imagine yourself in his shoes, stumbling into something way over your head and scrambling to undo it. The chemistry with Ali Sheedy, the understated humour, the ticking clock suspense, it all worked. Critically and commercially, WarGames was a hit. It was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, and it helped kickstart an entire wave of tech thrillers throughout the 80s and 90s. More than that, it helped cement Broderick as a thinking teen actor, someone who could carry a movie without falling into the usual teen idol mould. He definitely wasn't a heartthrob, he was very interesting, and I can't think of another actor at that time similar to him. And just like that, Matthew Broderick was officially on the map. Coming off the success of WarGames, Matthew Broderick could have gone in almost any direction. Another teen thriller, a coming-of-age drama, maybe even a studio comedy. But instead, he took a left turn into medieval fantasy. In Ladyhawke in 1985, he plays Philippe Gaston, better known as the Mouse. a wisecracking thief who escapes from a dungeon and gets caught up in a dark, romantic fairy tale involving a cursed knight and his shape-shifting lover. It was the kind of role that could have sunk a young actor, full of strange tonal shifts, old-world dialogue, and high fantasy melodrama, but Broderick made it work through sheer charm and timing. What made his performance so memorable was that he didn't try to match the brooding seriousness of Rutger Hauer. Instead, he became the audience's guide, breaking the tension with humour and muttering sarcastic monologues and reacting like a modern guy trapped in a fantasy novel. It gave the film a strange, uneven but weirdly compelling energy. Ladyhawke wasn't a blockbuster, but it found a devoted fan base on VHS, myself included, and Broderick's performance was a big part of that. At a time when many young male actors were trying to be Tom Cruise or Rob Lowe, Broderick stayed in his own lane. By 1986, Matthew Broderick had already made his mark as a smart, slightly left-of-centre teen actor, but then Ferris Bueller's Day Off happened, and suddenly he was immortal. Written and directed by John Hughes, the film captured lightning in a bottle. Broderick's Ferris was the ultimate teenage fantasy, a charming, untouchable kid who skips school, borrows a Ferrari, crashes a parade, and still makes it home before dinner. It was funny, irreverent, weirdly profound, and somehow timeless. And at the centre of it all was Broderick, breaking the fourth wall like he was letting the audience in on a secret. You weren't just watching him, you were in on it with him. For me, this one's evergreen. I still watch Ferris Bueller regularly, not just out of nostalgia, but because it really still works. Every beat, every little side glance, every needle drop. It's one of those rare films that doesn't feel trapped in its decade, even though obviously it's soaked in 80s style. And Broderick, he's pitch perfect. Confident without being smug, funny without pushing. There's a lightness to his performance that's deceptively hard to pull off. The film was a huge hit, of course, and it turned Broderick into a household name almost overnight. But it also became a double-edged sword. Ferris was such a specific character, so unique and culturally iconic, that it became hard for audiences to see Broderick as anyone else. He wasn't just playing a part, he was Ferris Bueller, and for better or worse, that image stuck with him for the rest of his career. In interviews, Broderick's admitted that while he's proud of the film, there were times he felt trapped by it. It's the kind of role that defines an actor and makes it difficult to move on from. Still, it's impossible to overstate the impact Ferris Bueller's Day Off had, not just on teen movies, but on pop culture at large. It's one of those rare films where the lead character becomes part of the language. He was a symbol of freedom, of rebellion without bitterness, of doing life your own way. And for Broderick, it marked both the peak of his teen fame and the beginning of a much more complicated chapter. After Ferris Bueller, Matthew Broderick could have easily coasted on high school comedies or leaned into safer teen heartthrob territory, but to his credit, he didn't. Instead, he chose projects that nudged him into more serious, or at least more complicated territory. In Project X in 1987, he played a young Air Force trainee who uncovers a covert experiment involving chimpanzees and radiation exposure. It sounds like a strange sci-fi thriller, and in some ways it is, but it's also a surprisingly emotional film. Broderick brings real empathy to the role, playing it with a kind of quiet rebellion. He's not the schemer from Ferris anymore, he's a guy wrestling with authority, ethics, and his own growing sense of responsibility. Then came Biloxi Blues in '88, the second part of Neil Simon's semi-autobiographical Eugene trilogy. Broderick returned to the role of Eugene Morris Jerome, a part he'd played to great acclaim on stage, but this time, the setting shifts to basic training in Mississippi, and the stakes are more adult. The film didn't set the box office on fire, but Broderick's performance was strong, more restrained than his earlier roles, with moments of quiet introspection. He was maturing on screen, testing his range, and while he was still playing a version of the clever observer character, it was no longer filtered through a high school lens. It was also during this period in August of '87 that Broderick was involved in a tragic car accident while vacationing in Northern Ireland with his then girlfriend Jennifer Grey. Their rental car collided with another vehicle, killing a mother and daughter in the other car. Broderick was hospitalised with a broken leg and a concussion, and though Grey's injuries were less serious, the emotional toll on both of them was immense. And honestly, personally speaking, I don't remember hearing much about it at the time. I only really learned about it years later, and it added weight to his story I hadn't realised was even there. It must have been an incredibly difficult time, and while Broderick returned to work not long after, it's hard not to see this moment as a turning point, not in terms of public image necessarily, but in the emotional arc of his life and career. Something most definitely changed. Not every film in this era for him became a classic, but they marked an important shift. Broderick wasn't just trying to repeat his biggest hits now, he was trying to grow out of them, and with his next role in Glory he'd take that even further, stepping into one of the most powerful and understated performances of his career. By the end of the 80s, Matthew Broderick had built up a diverse filmography, from Cold War thrillers and high school comedies to stage adaptations and quieter dramas. But with Glory in 1989, he took a sharp turn into something far more serious and for many unexpected. Directed by Edward Zwick, Glory tells the story of 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, one of the first all-black units in the Union Army during the Civil War. Broderick plays Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, a real-life officer who leads the regiment into battle. It's a role that required a complete shift from his previous screen persona. He wasn't the quirky observer anymore, or the guy with the smirk and the one-liner. Here, he had to convey quiet command, fear, and resolve in the face of moral weight and historical trauma. And he pulled it off. Broderick's performance was understated, sometimes even self-effacing, which matched the character perfectly. He was a man learning to lead and learning to listen, and for a lot of people, Glory remains one of Broderick's finest hours. But then, in true Broderick fashion, he followed it up with something completely different, the offbeat comedy The Freshman in 1990. He stars opposite Marlon Brando, who plays a version of, well, himself. A mob boss who may or may not be parodying his Godfather role. It's a strange, clever film about identity, imitation, and falling into a world you don't understand. Broderick plays a film student who gets sucked into the underworld, and the whole movie has this almost surreal energy, like it's half satire, half coming-of-age story. This combination, Glory and The Freshman, shows what was becoming a pattern in Broderick's career. He was gravitating towards stories that interested him, often in supporting or ensemble roles, and it worked. After the drama of Glory and the self-aware oddness of The Freshman, you might have expected Broderick to double down on more prestige roles, but instead he popped up in a Disney movie. Not just any Disney movie though, The Lion King. In 1994, he voiced adult Simba, and for a generation of kids, that role became the new defining Matthew Broderick performance, even though many of them never saw his face. And while the movie was great for his resume, it didn't exactly boost his visibility in the way a live-action hit might have. Then came a strange run. In The Cable Guy in 1996, he played the straight man opposite Jim Carrey's deranged TV-obsessed loner. It was a weird, dark comedy that confused a lot of audiences at the time, myself included, but has since become something of a cult classic. Broderick was good in it, subdued, reactive, increasingly paranoid, but he got overshadowed by Carrey's manic energy, as pretty much anyone would have been. Then there was Godzilla in '98, which looked like a huge career move on paper. Big budget, summer blockbuster, Roland Emmerich directing, and Broderick as the lead. But the film was panned, loud, long, and overstuffed. It made money, but it didn't help his reputation. Some critics even questioned whether Broderick fit as a blockbuster lead. He wasn't imposing, and he definitely wasn't an action hero. That wasn't a flaw, it just wasn't who he was. And then came Election in 1999, which felt like a course correction. Broderick plays Jim McAllister, a frustrated high school teacher slowly unraveling in the face of Reese Witherspoon's terrifyingly ambitious student Tracy Flick. It's one of his best performances, bitter, petty, hilarious, and pathetic in equal measure. By the time the decade closed, Broderick wasn't a bankable box office draw, but he wasn't a has-been either. He was in between. In 2000, he gave one of his most quietly affecting performances in You Can Count on Me, playing the estranged, unreliable brother of Laura Linney's character. It's a small, emotionally rich indie film, and Broderick's supporting role isn't flashy, but it's real. But around that same time, he also dipped back into broader territory, like Inspector Gadget in '99, which was, well, it was something. I mean, now I'm old enough to have watched the TV show as a kid, and I get that he was trying to bring some warmth and character to the famously clumsy cartoon detective, but it was a complete flop. A critical flop too. He's admitted in interviews that he didn't feel great about it, and it became one of those "what were they thinking" entries on his filmography. Fortunately, something else was happening, something much closer to his roots. Broderick was returning to the stage in a big way. He'd always been a theatre guy. Remember, he won a Tony back in '83 for Brighton Beach Memoirs, but in the early 2000s, he became a Broadway fixture. The biggest success? The Producers. He teamed up with Nathan Lane for Mel Brooks' musical Juggernaut, and the chemistry between them was electric. The stage version was a massive hit. The 2005 film adaptation, less so. In the last decade or so, Matthew Broderick has settled into a rhythm that feels comfortable. Not lazy or disengaged, just lived in, like someone who's figured out how to keep working without chasing anything. In Tower Heist in 2011, he popped up in a supporting role alongside Ben Stiller and Eddie Murphy, playing a laid-off Wall Street casualty who gets roped into a revenge plot against a corrupt billionaire. He was the anxious, slightly pathetic voice of reason, a role he plays better than almost anyone. Then, in Manchester by the Sea in 2016, he appeared in a small but pointed role as a well-meaning but emotionally distant second husband. It's the kind of part that could easily fade into the background, just the right note of polite awkwardness, enough to make you wince, even when he's smiling. And more recently, in No Hard Feelings in 2023, he played Jennifer Lawrence's character's adoptive father. Alongside all of this, Broderick has continued to work in theatre, both on and off Broadway. He reunited with Nathan Lane multiple times, including It's Only a Play and Plaza Suite, the latter of which he starred in opposite his real-life wife, Sarah Jessica Parker. They've been together since 1997 and have 3 children. For a couple that famous, they've kept things remarkably private. Low-key, drama-free, just quietly raising a family and doing good work. His career has never followed a straight line. He moved between genres, stage and screen, between cultural moments, and managed to leave a mark. And if you grew up watching WarGames or still throw on Ferris Bueller's Day Off occasionally like I do, then you know exactly how much of a mark that really is. Oh, and before the comments roll in, no, I'm not AI. I'm not some text-to-speech thing narrating scripts from a server farm. I'm a real person, writing this stuff with actual fingers. I just sound suspiciously smooth. So yeah, like Ferris said, life moves pretty fast. If you don't like and subscribe once in a while, you could miss it. Well, as ever, I look forward to seeing you all in the next one.